Have you ever wondered if there isn't a better way to read? Do you often lose the focus when you're reading? Your mind wanders all over the place and you've read a paragraph and you wonder, what the heck did I just read? Well, welcome to the Smart Test Masterclass on transitions. Transitions are the key element to help you become a better reader. Hi, I'm Jeanette Gerber and I'm your host today. So we divide transitions into 6 types: continuation, contrast, comparison, support, conclusion, and sequence. And you see them on your worksheet. And yes, make sure you have a worksheet in front of you so that you can work through this with me while I'm teaching you about transitions. Always work actively. Don't just watch a video passively like a couch potato, but really actively be engaged. Pause the video in between to catch up with the worksheet. So you have something in your hands afterwards that you can always use as a reference. So there we go, the 6 types of transitions. As a matter of fact, I suggest you circle transitions when you read essay-style passages and when you read really dense text. Why? Because transitions guide the reader through the passage flow and the author's intent. So when you circle transitions, pay attention to how the emphasis either shifts or doesn't shift, and how it shifts when it does. There, let's go and practice that. So let's start with continuation transitions. We have 2 sentences here, sentences 1 and 2 on your worksheet. In addition to walking her dog, comma, Sue runs 2 miles daily. And you might wonder, why didn't you just read the comma? Well, in case you were watching the sentence structure and punctuation video, then you will know that reading the comma, analyzing the sentence structure also will help you become a better reader, because then you can zero in on the core message of the sentence more quickly. So, in addition to is clearly a continuation transition, because in addition to tells you there's more of the same stuff. We call that in addition to is like a fast forward button. There's nothing new here, it's just more of the same stuff. Well, in addition to walking her dogs, Sue runs 2 miles daily. So there's a lot of exercise. We start with walking. The comma, by the way, here is also very helpful because it tells you exactly where the second part of this sentence starts and where the second part of the continuation here starts. Walking, running. Clearly, Sue must be a very active person. Then, sentence number 2. I not only loved my mother, comma, again we have the comma here, so we know exactly where the second part starts. And the second part here is but also. So it's not but alone, but it's but also. But also admired her. Again, the emphasis stays the same, loved and admired. Just like here, active, here, very positive feelings, more positive feelings. That's how continuation transitions work. Mathematically, if you think about that, what you're going to see here is that we have x1 and then we have x2. So we have in addition to x1, comma, x2. Not only x1, comma, but also x2. More of the same. That's how continuation transitions work. So now that we cover continuation transitions, let's talk about contrasting transitions. Here, sentence number 3 on your worksheet. Despite. Despite what? Despite bad weather. Again, we have a comma to help us understand where the break is, where we now expect a change in the emphasis. So here the emphasis doesn't stay the same, but it must change. Bad weather, Ali swam 2 miles. Now, why is that a contrast, you asking me probably? You know, bad weather and swimming, how is that a contrast? Well, think about it. For the author here of the sentence, there's clearly a disconnect between bad weather and swimming. So that means there's something at odds with that. And that's what you can infer. You can infer that according to the author, there's something not usual about swimming in bad weather. And that's how we can make inferences. Sentence 4, let's look how that works. We often talk to Pam, comma, even though what? Again, we know now something has to switch. The emphasis, the tone has to change. Even though what? Lives far away. Again, this is not a super obvious contract, but we often talk and living far away. Again, what you can infer here logically is that according to the author, people who live further away don't tend to talk as often as people who live closer together. So this will be a proper logical inference. Some of you might have heard at some point that an inference is an educated guess, but it actually isn't. It's much more than that. A proper inference is a logic statement, and it's something that must be true given the information you have. And because of the transition here, you can make that inference. If you didn't have the transition, you couldn't make that inference. That's the kind of big difference these transitions make. So what's happening here with the emphasis? Well, we go from, let's make this blue again, we go from X now to Y. So despite X, comma, Y. X, comma, even though Y. So here we have a clear contrast between X and Y. Again, you see, this is almost like mathematical. It's very logical. This is where language is really, really beautifully logical. So now we covered continuation transitions that act like a fast forward button. We talked about contrasting transitions that create a U-turn in the emphasis, in the tone. So now let's talk about comparisons. Comparisons can go either way. They either can give you the same kind of tone if you are comparing to like things, or they can create a contrasting tone when you're comparing to unlike things. So let's look at how that works. Sentence 5, if you're following on the worksheet, which I really hope you do. Sue prefers walking her dog to running. Prefers one thing to another. Walking to running. So in this case, we don't have a comma, but we have the little preposition to that is also really, really helpful to see where we have the break. In this case, preferring one thing over another creates a contrast. So Sue clearly does not feel the same way about walking her dog as she feels about running. That's where the contrast lies. In the sentence 6, we have just like. Just like my brother, comma, so here we have the comma again, my sister lives far away. Well, what am I really comparing? Well, I'm not comparing the brother to the sister per se, I'm comparing how far away they live. And in this case, pretty much equal distance, that means we're comparing two like things. So there's not a contrast between brother and sister, which might be tempting, but it's actually a comparison between how far away they live. And that is very, very similar. So as we said, comparisons can go either create a continuation tone, that means the tone continues, or it can create a contrasting tone, the way we did in the first sentence, sentence 5, depending on what we are comparing. Now, why is it so helpful to pay attention to comparisons? Why do we single them out and not just say, well, one of them is continuation, the other one is contrast? Why do we single out comparisons? Because when you're working on grammar, when you create comparisons in your own sentence, you're comparing like things. So for example, you want to compare a painter to another painter, not a painter to the paintings of another painter. You want to compare, you can compare a dog to a cat, but you can't really compare the way a dog eats to a cat. You can only compare the way a dog eats to the way a cat eats. So when you see comparison transitions in a grammar section of either an SAT or ACT or any other test, or you're editing your own essays, pay attention when you see transitions that indicate comparisons. Pay attention to the logic of your comparison. And also make sure that you have parallel structure when you have comparison in a sentence. So now let's move on to the fourth of those transitions, support. But we're not gonna work on support alone, we're gonna work together with conclusion. Why? Because support must support must lead to the conclusion. The emphasis of the support and the conclusion have to match. Does that make sense? If I give you really positive support, then the conclusion also has to be really positive, and vice versa. Another word for support would be cause, how we can look at cause. And another word for conclusion, we can use effect. We want to see how cause leads to effect in a sentence. And again, this is highly logical, mathematically logical. And so for those of you who struggle with language but do so much better in math and science, here you go. This is a really logical approach to language. You're gonna love this. Let's look at it. Because I love my dog. So clearly, my cause needs to, look at this word, cause. Because I love my dog, so this must be the cause. So love my dog is the cause. Again, the comma tells me where the separation is between cause and effect. Again, the comma, very, very helpful tool. Because I love my dog, comma, I walk him every day. So, and yes, that's my dog, Lux. I love walking him. And so clearly, this is the effect. Cause, effect. The cause has to lead to the effect. Makes sense, right? So let's look at the second sentence. I love my dog, period. No transition here. We don't know where this is leading. But the second sentence here does. We start with a transition. Hence is a typical conclusion transition. That means I know after hence, I must have the effect. I must have the conclusion. Again, this is the effect, which also means before the hence, I have to have the cause. So I have exactly the same cause and effect in these two sentences, and I dare say these two sentences have exactly the same value because they convey exactly the same message. The fact that you have a supporting transition here and a concluding transition here in and of itself doesn't make it a difference. You have one or the other. You would never have a sentence, by the way, with both of these transitions in it. It's one or the other. So what we see here, and oh yes, I forgot to say, we're working on sentences 7 and 9. I'm skipping 8 on purpose for a moment. So for those of you who follow with the worksheet, pay attention here. So we can say that sentences 7 and 9 have the same cause and effect. There we go. So now in sentence 8, we have Joe exercises daily in order to. So here's our transition, in order to. Now in order to could also be because he wants to. In order to what? Get into shape. So is this now the cause or is it the effect? It can be confusing if you don't trust the transitions, but if you do trust transitions, it makes perfect sense. So bear with me here. In order to gives you the cause. So here is the cause. So what's the effect? Well, sometimes we say the effect before we mention the cause. And that is the effect. Exercising daily is now the effect. This causes wanting to get into shape causes Joe to exercise daily. Got that? So let's see how that holds up with sentence number 10, where we have the concluding transition. Joe exercises daily. So we start exactly the same way. Exercises. Now we have thus. Thus is clearly a concluding transition. That means the thus gives us the effect. So he is in good shape now is the effect. So what happened here? What's the cause then? Well, exercising here is the cause. So in this sentence, we actually reversed the cause and the effect. And that was sneaky, wasn't it? Yes. But if you pay attention to the transitions, you will be able to follow this. You will be able to catch this. And it's really important. If you do a science, if you work on a science experiment, you want to be absolutely sure if you understand the difference between the cause and the effect. Understanding transitions will guide you, will help you understand what's going on. In these two sentences, we clearly do not have the same cause and effect. Totally not. So that's what you want to mark up here on your worksheet. Difficult, yes, but doable and logical, absolutely. I hope you had fun with this one. Okay, we're reaching the bottom here. We're at sequence transitions now, the last of the 6 transitions we're covering today. Number 11, sentence number 11, for those of you who are following with the worksheet. Beethoven was born in 1770. Clearly sequence. Sequence is any time word. Time. If it has to do with time, it's sequence. Born in 1770 and died in 1827. So here, do we have an emphasis? We talked about having emphasis. We talked about continuation, being a fast forward. The emphasis cannot change. We talked about contrast where the emphasis must change. We talked about comparison transitions that either it stays the same or it changes depending on what kind of transition you have. We talked about support that has to have the same emphasis as the conclusion. So what about this sentence? Is there an emphasis? And you might think, well, born is the opposite of dying, and you're right, it is the opposite in a way. But that's not the point here. Here the point is simply giving you a timeline. So in this case, we simply have a timeline. There is no clear emphasis otherwise. It just gives you a sequence of events. So let's look at the second sentence. Number 12. Rhea called last week. So called last week is clearly a time-related transition. And then she'll call again this week. Again in and of itself is a time word, and so is this week. So what's happening here? Can you see it? Continuation. Called and call again. So she'll continue that same pattern. So here we use time words specifically for continuation. There we go. And finally, sentence 13, in 1960, again I'm starting with a year, in 1960, Detroit was thriving. Here we have a semicolon, so we know that we're starting a new sentence that is related to the previous one. By 2010, comma, so by 2010, sequence, it was devastated. So in this third case, we are using sequence transitions to indicate a contrast. So between thriving and devastated. So here the emphasis clearly changes. So we have a contrast. So time words, time transitions, sequence transitions can be used for any kind of relationships, for any kind of emphasis, no emphasis, same emphasis, changed emphasis. Pay attention to it. This is how the author of a passage, the author of any kind of text is guiding you. Well-written pieces have good transitions in order to guide the reader. And that's how you're going to become a better reader, but also a better editor. Good luck with that. Thank you so much for joining us today.